Would you dare to work in a cemetery alone at night? Think carefully. This isn't a horror movie. This is real life. Graves of people you never knew, but who might still be nearby. Whispers that come out of nowhere. Footsteps behind you when no one else should be there. And the strangest of all, presences that seem to know your name. If you think ghosts are just superstition, you might change your mind after hearing what Walter Hargrove has to tell. For 38 years, he was responsible for one of the oldest cemeteries in the state of Virginia, United States. And even after retiring, he holds stories he never managed to forget, experiences so bizarre they would give even the most skeptical person chills down their spine. Today, Walter lives alone, surrounded by notes and memories of a lifetime spent among the dead, and things he assures cannot be explained. But beware, this story isn't about cheap scares. It's about the thin line between the world of the living and those who have gone before and maybe never really left. If you like supernatural stories based on true events, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below if you believe in life after death. Get ready. What you're about to hear is a dark journey through the mind and heart of a gravedigger who has seen it all and survived to tell the tale. Walter Hargrove is 69 years old and currently lives in a simple house on the outskirts of Brookhill, a small town near Richmond, Virginia. To passers-by, he's just a retired gentleman like many others, but few know what he carries inside. For 38 years, Walter was a gravedigger and caretaker of the Brookhill Municipal Cemetery, an old ground with burial plots dating back to the 19th century. He started working there at age 31, after the early death of his father, who had also been a gravedigger. At the time, it was a job no one wanted, and maybe that's why it was offered to him. But what seemed like just another job soon became something much bigger. Walter kept diaries recording dates, names, voices, apparitions, and feelings. Even today, he keeps everything in notebooks piled on a shelf in his living room, documents of a life that, according to him, was marked by encounters with the inexplicable. Despite writing hundreds of pages of paranormal accounts, Walter has never published anything. He says he doesn't do it for fear of judgment. If it was just a ghost story, that would be fine. But it's more than that. It's about things that stir the soul, he often says. He never married, had no children, and rarely receives visitors. He claims he prefers silence, which, by the way, is where the voices manifest most often. Today, Walter has decided to share some of the stories that marked him the most. Stories he believes aren't there to scare, but to reveal that even amid death, there can still be a living and aware presence in the most unlikely places. From a very young age, Walter Hargrove knew he was different. While other children were afraid of the dark, he was drawn to it. He used to wake up in the middle of the night, saying there was someone in the room. His parents, religious and conservative, thought it was childish imagination, but over time, it became hard to ignore certain events. At 8 years old, Walter told precise details about the funeral of a neighbor he never met. Details only someone who had been there could know. His mother was frightened, but it was an elderly neighbor named Mildred who explained what might be happening. "This boy has a thin veil," she said. "He sees what others don't see." It was the first time Walter heard the word medium. Mildred gave him a small wooden rosary and taught him not to be afraid, but curious. From then on, he started writing down everything. Shadows, voices, vivid dreams, as if his life was divided between the physical and spiritual worlds. Over the years, he learned to control his reactions. He stopped telling people what he saw to avoid being called crazy. He kept everything to himself, silently. But the gift, if it can be called that, never left him. When he accepted the job at the cemetery, Walter knew he wouldn't be alone, even during the night shifts. And somehow, he felt that place was calling him, as if the souls there knew that finally, someone was willing to listen to them. And that's exactly what started to happen. It was a cloudy autumn afternoon when Walter had his first clear experience inside the cemetery. He had been assigned to do a routine inspection at the old Callahan family mausoleum, a dark stone building with iron doors locked with a padlock and moss-covered windows. Few people ever visited that tomb, but something that day felt different. The air was heavier, as if time had stopped around that structure. While checking the surroundings, Walter heard a short whistle. Loud, clear, and right after, another one. It was as if a child was calling attention with that typical sound of someone want to play. He looked around. Nothing. Not a living soul. He took a few steps and, turning the corner of the mausoleum, saw a small figure running among the tombstones, a boy with dark hair, wearing an old-fashioned baseball team uniform and holding a leather ball in his hands. Walter called out, "Hey, are you okay, boy?" But the boy didn't answer. He just looked at him with a vacant expression and disappeared behind a gravestone. When Walter ran to the spot, there was no one there. No trace. No footprints in the damp soil. Intrigued, Walter checked the cemetery records and discovered something chilling. A boy named Timothy Callahan, who died in 1952 after being hit by a car returning from a game, was buried there, exactly in that section. The next morning, Walter brought a white candle and left it on Timmy's grave. He didn't hear any more whistles, but he felt a strange peace, as if he had acknowledged a presence that only wanted to be remembered. And at that moment, he knew this was just the beginning. Walter always said some manifestations didn't come with scares, but with feelings hard to explain. It was a hot summer morning when he was assigned to prepare the ground for a new burial near the old section of the cemetery, where the tombs rarely receive visitors. While digging under the sun, the sound of the shovel hitting the earth was the only noise around, until a soft voice broke the silence. Walt Sinho. The nickname echoed in the air like a familiar whisper, yet impossible. It was a name only his mother used when he was a child, and she had passed away years ago. Walter stopped. Sweat ran down his temples, but the chill he felt came from inside. When he turned around, he saw an elderly lady with white hair, wearing a floral dress and a hat adorned with artificial daisies, standing a few meters away next to an aged tombstone. She pointed to the broken flower vase on the grave and sweetly said, "Could you fix this for me, dear?" Not knowing exactly why. He just nodded. He walked over, removed the shards, cleaned the spot, and arranged the remaining flowers. When he looked up, she was gone. The name engraved on the tomb was Mildred Thompson, the same elderly neighbor who, decades before, was the first person to say Walter was a medium, the woman who gave him the rosary and said he saw what others couldn't see. Walter stood there for several minutes, overcome with a deep emotion, not fear, but longing. He felt as if he had just reunited with someone dear, if only for a moment, and at that instant, he knew the boundary between worlds is much thinner than he had imagined. Among the many sections of Brook Hill Cemetery was one known as Elite, where old businessmen, politicians, and influential city figures rested. It was a wooded area with wrought iron benches and a strangely serene atmosphere. Walter liked to walk through there at the end of the day during his final round before closing. It was on one of these rounds that he saw her. Sitting alone on one of the benches, a young woman was reading a book. She had long dark hair, wore modest clothes, and seemed completely unaware of the world around her. Walter found it strange. The cemetery was about to close, and he didn't remember seeing anyone enter that afternoon. He approached carefully and said, "Miss, we're closing. Is everything okay?" She slowly lifted her eyes, as if waking from a trance. She looked confused. "Closing? I don't even know how I got here." Walter tried to reassure her, but in the blink of an eye, she vanished, without a sound, without leaving any trace. Thinking he might have had a brief blackout or hallucination, he decided not to mention it to anyone. But that same night, he told Terry, his co-worker on duty. Terry looked pale and answered seriously, "Walter, I was there the whole time. You were talking to yourself." The silence that followed was heavier than any tomb. Walter knew what he had seen. He knew that presence was real, even if he couldn't prove it. From that day on, he avoided the benches in the Elite A section at dusk, and carried the certainty that sometimes some souls forget they have left or simply don't want to go away. Not all of Walter's stories were silent or subtle. Some left marks witnessed by the entire cemetery staff, and this was, without a doubt, the most disturbing. It was the winter of 1998 when Sisters Louise and Emily Whitaker, aged 5 and 3, were found dead inside their home in Mapleton, a village a few kilometers from Brook Hill. Their parents had traveled without informing anyone, and the girls were locked inside without food for days. By the time neighbors noticed the silence, it was too late. The funeral was quiet, full of sadness. Small coffins always weigh heavier on the heart. But days later, something unusual began happening. Food started disappearing from the chapel pantry in the cemetery. Bread, cookies, even fruit. At first, they thought of rats or homeless people. Until one morning, Walter found all the missing food carefully arranged on the girls' graves. Thinking it was some kind of anonymous tribute, he just watched. But the pattern repeated. Every night something disappeared, and in the morning, there were the foods arranged side by side like a picnic. Other employees began to notice too. One of them even said he heard children's giggles coming from that section. Since then, no one dared to mock Walter's stories anymore. Over time, the gravediggers themselves started leaving small loaves of bread there every morning, as if feeding not only bodies that had left, but presences that still lingered. It was the only time Walter witnessed a collective phenomenon. It wasn't just him. Everyone felt it. And even today, on very quiet nights, you can still see fresh crumbs on those little white tombstones, as if someone was still waiting for a snack. Not all of Walter's experiences were solitary. On some occasion, they had the company, or at least a witness, of a colleague, young Terry, who also worked in the cemetery. On a particularly cold autumn night after work, the two were making their final round in the oldest section of the cemetery. The silence was total, interrupted only by the sound of their footsteps on the damp earth. Suddenly, a strange glow appeared among the trees. Small lights, like fireflies, floated around Forgotten Grave, illuminating the area in a supernatural way. Walter and Terry stopped, intrigued. Then they heard footsteps, firm yet silent, slowly approaching. From behind the shadows came the figure of an old man, with messy white hair and beard, worn-out old clothes, and tired eyes. He approached in a hoarse voice and said, "Got a cigarette to spare?" Terry, overcome by panic, turned and ran without looking back. Walter, however, stayed still, unable to deny the request of that spirit so real, and at the same time so unreal. That night, Walter decided not to tell others about the encounter. He wanted to protect Terry from judgment and fear that the colleague would probably carry after such an experience. But that was one of the few times Walter was sure he wasn't alone in his visions, that there were others like him, witnessing the invisible, and that some spirits simply want company. Or, in that man's case, a simple cigarette. Walter Hargrove often says not everyone is ready to accept the existence of what he experienced for almost 4 decades. He doesn't want to be seen as a lunatic or a character from horror stories. To him, all of this is real and part of a dimension few can see, and even fewer understand. We live in a world full of mysteries, Walter says, his voice calm but filled with sincerity. Sometimes what feels like fear is just the unknown knocking at the door. For him, what matters is not proving to anyone that ghosts exist, but sharing his experiences, so we can at least open our minds and hearts a little. If these stories move you, spark curiosity, or even a little fear, know that you're not alone. There are many like Walter who dedicate their lives to listening to what silence tries to say. And of course, here on the channel, we always bring real accounts like this. Stories that challenge logic and make us reflect on what lies beyond what we see. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chilling stories. I also want to invite you to check out our partner channel that always brings incredible supernatural content. The link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching until here. And remember, the world is bigger than our eyes can see. Sometimes we just need courage to look. See you in the next video.